Okay, folks, welcome to another deep dive. And wow, this one is a biggie.
Yeah, this is a big one.
We're talking about billionaires today.
Billionaires, that's right.
Yeah, well, you guys sent us a lot to think about with this one. I mean, articles and research and all this stuff, just looking at, you know, is it even okay for billionaires to exist?
Right.
Like, should anybody be able to have that much money?
It's a good question.
Especially when there's so many people struggling. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's definitely a topic that people have a lot of strong opinions about.
Strong opinions is an understatement.
Yeah.
We are talking about some seriously big names here, too. Musk, Bezos, Gates, the whole crew.
The titans of industry.
Titans is a good word for it. So let's just jump right in, okay? First things first, this is kind of a big one. Should billionaires even exist? Like, is it just inherently a bad thing if one person has that much wealth?
Well, a lot of this boils down to how we balance individual success with what's good for society as a whole. Like, should there even be a limit on how much one person can achieve, even if theoretically their achievements end up benefiting everybody else?
Yeah, because, when I was looking through all this stuff that you guys sent, there are definitely people out there who think that billionaires are basically like, I don't know, rock stars or something.
Right.
Like they're out there taking risks and, starting these incredible companies, creating jobs. You got to think about people like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, right? These guys are pushing the boundaries of what's even possible.
Absolutely. And there's a real fear among some that if you start, taxing the super rich too heavily or trying to redistribute their wealth too aggressively, it could end up backfiring.
Yeah.
You might stifle that kind of entrepreneurial spirit. People might be less likely to take risks if they know a huge chunk of their potential earnings is just going to get taken away.
Makes sense, right? Like, why bother putting in all the effort if you can't reap the rewards? But I got to say, there's this whole other side to this whole debate, too. You can't just ignore the potential downsides of all this, right? When you've got this much wealth concentrated in the hands of so few people, doesn't that kind of mess things up for everybody else?
Oh, absolutely. A lot of the research you sent points to some pretty serious concerns about extreme wealth inequality, like, for example, how it can distort our democratic processes. If the super rich have all this extra money, they can use it to influence elections and policies in a way that benefits them, but not necessarily the rest of us.
Yeah. And, once that starts happening, it's like a runaway train.
Mm.
The wealthy get more and more powerful. They use that power to make themselves even richer and further rig the system in their favor. And meanwhile, everybody else is struggling to get by and feeling like the game is totally rigged against them.
Exactly. And it creates this vicious cycle.
It's crazy. And then on top of all that, there are the ethical questions. Some of the articles you sent straight up accuse certain billionaires of doing some pretty shady things, like exploiting loopholes, underpaying their workers, all that kind of stuff, just so they can make even more money. Come on. Is that really ethical, even if it is technically legal?
Yeah, it's a tough one. Take Amazon, for example. There have been tons of reports about their labor practices, right? Some workers are saying they're being pushed to the limit, expected to meet these crazy productivity targets, and that they're not even getting basic benefits. Now, Amazon says they treat their employees fairly, but these allegations definitely raise some red flags. How can you justify amassing this massive fortune if it potentially comes at the expense of the people who are actually doing the work?
Right. It kind of makes you wonder, like, is there any point where we say enough is enough? Like, you've hit the limit. Like, is a wealth cap something that would even work? Would it even be a good idea in the first place?
That's a pretty radical idea. A wealth cap. Nobody really agrees on whether it would actually work or even if it's something we should even be aiming for.
Yeah, I guess so.
You've got some economists who are saying, look, if you put a limit on how much wealth people can accumulate, it'll kill the incentive for innovation. Why bother coming up with the next big thing if you can't fully benefit from it, right?
Right.
And they also worry that it could discourage investment and ultimately hurt the economy as a whole. But then on the other hand, you've got people who say, hey, a wealth cap could actually free up a ton of resources that we could then use to fund social programs, create a more equitable society, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I can see that side of it, too. It makes you think.
Right.
But okay, let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about something a little less theoretical. What about all the billionaires who donate billions of dollars to charity? Like Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, those guys.
Right.
Isn't that proof that they're trying to do some good with their wealth? But then you've also got people who say, yeah, well, guys like Bezos and Musk aren't doing nearly enough. So what's the deal? Is philanthropy really the answer here?
It's tricky. Philanthropy is great, don't get me wrong, but some people argue that it's more like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. You know what I mean? It might help a little, but it doesn't really address the underlying problem. Like, the real question is it enough for these billionaires to just give away a chunk of their money? Or do they have a deeper responsibility to actually do something about the root causes of inequality?
That's deep, man.
Right. And one of the articles you sent even argued that billionaire philanthropy can sometimes do more harm than good
Really?
because it allows the super rich to decide how social problems should be solved without necessarily taking into account the needs and perspectives of the people who are actually affected by those problems.
Huh. That's a really good point. So, I mean, what do you think? Like, is philanthropy enough? Or should billionaires be doing way more? Like, is there even a right answer to this whole thing?
Honestly, I think that's the million-dollar question, literally. I mean, as a society, this is something we need to be talking about. We need to be figuring out.
Yeah, for real. I feel like we covered a lot of ground today. We talked about whether billionaires are a good thing or a bad thing. We dug into the problems that can come with having so much wealth concentrated in so few hands. And we looked at whether philanthropy is really the solution or just a fancy way of avoiding the real issues. It's complicated stuff, that's for sure.
It is, and it's not something with easy answers. But, as we wrap up, I just want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay, hit me.
Can we create a system where we can encourage people to innovate and create wealth, but also make sure that those resources are distributed more fairly? Like, can we find that balance between letting individuals succeed and making sure society as a whole is thriving?
That's the dream, right?
Yeah, that's the dream.
A lot to chew on.
Definitely.
Well, thanks for tuning in, everyone, and, keep thinking about this stuff. It's important. We'll catch you next time on another Deep Dive.